This will be about a 30-minute webinar. We have a lot of material, so may go a little bit longer, but we'll try to get you out of here in 30 minutes. Everyone's been muted on entry to the webinar just to keep the noise down. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. The way you can enter those questions on the chat option on the menu when you signed into the webinar. Today we're going to talk about the legal requirements and stressing medical practices and dental practices as well as healthcare, including the security risk assessment that's required legally. We'll talk about breach notifications and also preventative measures to avoid a ransomware attack and a breach. Healthcare is an industry that's very targeted for ransomware attacks and breaches. Reason being is that healthcare organizations have the three types of information that every bad guy wants to get his hands on. You've got personal information, you've got financial information, including credit cards, and you also have healthcare information. So one of the highest incidents within the country of ransomware attacks is with healthcare organizations. What they want to do is get their hands on your information. They want to lock your system, try to charge you a ransom to get your data back. But more importantly, whether you pay the ransom or you don't pay the ransom, they have your data and they can release that information onto the dark web and make an awful lot of money from that information. So today, Matt and Jason are going to talk about those things and how to not make yourself become a victim. I'm going to turn over the webinar to Jason Centolella, who is the founder of Centolella's law firm out of DeWitt, New York. He is the founder, and their practice specializes in healthcare compliance issues. So it's all yours, Jason.
Thank you, Joe. And hi, everybody. As Joe said, my name is Jason Centolella. I practice in the area of healthcare, compliance, corporate work. I'm going to be speaking today about HIPAA in about 10 to 12 minutes. So it's a lot to digest in that very short period of time, but I'm going to hit some really high-level points. If there's any item you would like to discuss or need clarification on, feel free to reach out to me. It's a value-add service that we would just provide to STI, given our relationship and having the privilege to present here. So HIPAA was promulgated to reduce the costs to the healthcare system by standardizing the process of healthcare transactions and increasing the security and privacy of healthcare information. If you ask most people in the industry, they'll say that HIPAA has actually increased costs significantly. But it has, had the main impact has been on, the privacy side. So when people think of HIPAA, the main purpose is to protect protected health information. HIPAA has two main rules: the privacy rule, which addresses the use and disclosure of PHI, and the security rule, which sets minimum standards for protecting electronic protected health information. Within HIPAA, there's two key definitions: a covered entity and a business associate. Covered entity is a health plan, healthcare clearinghouse, healthcare provider that transmits healthcare information in connection with a transaction covered by HIPAA. And then there's the business associate. That's an entity that receives, maintains, or transmits PHI on behalf of a covered entity for very specific purposes. Those purposes include, claims processing, utilization review, quality assurance, billing, legal. It's important, and we'll discuss this later, to make sure that you're properly determining whether the entity involved is a covered entity or a business associate. So then we're going to go to privacy and security officers. Each healthcare organization should have a privacy officer. This person develops and implements privacy policies, is the point person for privacy complaints and questions, and this individual may be the same person as the security officer. Security officer oversees security measures and risk assessments. This individual is responsible for implementing the policies and procedures. Many organizations struggle to find the appropriate person for this role or roles. At a minimum, the person needs to have a pretty thorough understanding of HIPAA and its implementing regulations. So, as most or all of you know, is a medical practice, dental practice, there are required policies and procedures that you need under the privacy rules and the security rules. These need to be written policies and procedures. This is often neglected or done, in a less than thorough manner. Can't tell you how many, practices that we represent where we look at their policies and procedures, and it's something that they found on the internet. It's not designed to comply with the rules. It's not generally understood by the practice, and the government looks at this if there is a breach or a large scale hack. These policies will vary depending on the size of your organization, the resources available, but they should be individualized to the specific practice. At a minimum, they need to address the prevention, detection, and correction of security violations. You need to have notice of privacy practices. What are the permitted uses and explanation of rights? You need to have a policy regarding breach notification, which I'll discuss later on. A key aspect of HIPAA and the security rules are security measures and risk assessments. This has become an enormous issue with respect to all the ransomware attacks, the employee snooping. The government wants to know, if there is a breach, significant breach, whether a risk assessment has been done. And with a lack of a risk assessment, that usually results in larger penalties if penalties are issued by the Office of Civil Rights. You have to have reasonable and appropriate administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. You need to assess your current security risks, your current gaps in security. You need to develop policies and procedures around those risks. You need to implement these security procedures. You need to document your risk analysis, the decisions you made and the rationale for the decisions. And you need to periodically review them and update them. Oftentimes smaller practices, you don't need to go to the lengths that a hospital would go through, but you need to check your access logs. You need to have periodic password changes. You need to make sure you have encryption device. Your devices are encrypted. You have access controls. What do you conduct risk assessments on? Your electronic health record system, your practice management, your billing system. All of this, you don't need to spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars. You just need to periodically do these analysis and make sure that it's thorough. Where are we seeing most risk scenarios? On slide 7, you'll see ransomware, employee snooping, and email sent in an unsecured manner or text messaging. So ransomware, your employees need to be trained on not allowing the hacker to gain access. So don't click on links that are suspicious. don't respond to emails that are suspicious, employee snooping. This is a very difficult thing to prevent, but there has to be zero tolerance in the event that there is employee snooping. And then, a big area where we're seeing practices get into trouble is texting of PHI. And I'll give two quick examples. We had a physician who texted a picture of a patient's medical condition to the chief medical officer in connection with trying to show how busy this physician was and the risks that this physician was taking and making and undergoing these surgeries. He was reported, he's lost his medical license, and he lost his job. I mean, the consequences can be severe. So the next topic we're going to talk about is business associate agreements. Not a week goes by that I don't have a client reach out to me saying that we have to send a business associate agreement to this vendor or this vendor. But the key issue is determining whether you need a business associate. They have to be done for very specific purposes. Is the vendor conducting business associate services? IT providers, billing companies, cloud storage. It's not necessary in every instance. And when you sign a BAA with a business associate, you're undertaking obligations that you might not need to undertake. A key issue in business associate agreements is making sure the business associate had adequate insurance. So oftentimes we see that they don't. Staff training and education. This is another area where we see practices neglect. It is very important that staff members are trained at or close to the date of hire. They need to be trained on the privacy policies and procedures. If there are changes to the policies and procedures, you need to train them. There's really, in today's day and age, no excuse for not doing training. If there's a large scale breach, the government will look to see what kind of training the practice has provided. Training doesn't need to be overly extensive, but you need to train on what PHI is and how it's protected, minimum necessary standards, patient rights, identifying and reporting security incidents, password protection, and the practice needs to document all of its training. Another area where we see a lot of confusion is what constitutes a breach or a reportable breach. Just because there's been a disclosure doesn't necessarily mean that it's reportable to the government. When you're doing that analysis, you need to determine what the nature and extent of the protected health information was involved, what kind of identifiers, and the likelihood of re-identification. You have to identify who received the information. You need to determine whether the information was actually viewed and the extent of the risks that have been mitigated. I tell practices to always err on the side of caution and report it. So what does that entail? So you have to notify the patient with some specificity. You do not need to give them each and every detail of the disclosure. Depending on the size of the breach, you need to notify the media if it's over 500 individuals. If it's over 500 individuals, you need to notify the government within 60 days. If it's not over 500, you just need to put it on your annual reporting. So what are the HIPAA penalties? Most of the time, I don't see penalties imposed. But If you're lax in what you should be doing, the penalties can be severe. And, it could range from anywhere from, $140 to $70,000. But if you do the right thing and you report and you have your risk assessments and you do your training, it's unlikely that you will, have penalties imposed. There are other laws that apply to medical practices and dental practices. Graham, Leach, Bailey, indirectly can apply. The Federal Trade Act, applies to all businesses. Fair Credit Reporting Act. If you have access to credit card information, that can apply. I tell medical practices you need to be very careful on how you store financial information of patients and whether you even want to store it and how you store it. So you need to be mindful of those rules as well. States, each individual state has their own privacy laws. New York State has the SHIELD Act. It's broader than HIPAA. It has its own regulator. It's the New York State Attorney General and the State Department of Financial Services. You must comply with both state law and federal law. And there are a lot of recent examples of where covered entities were significantly fined by the government. Here in Syracuse, New York, which is where I am, Syracuse ASC, failed to do a risk analysis, fined $250,000. Deer Oaks, they failed to do a risk analysis, fined $225,000. Plastic Surgery Associates, no risk analysis, $500,000. Montefiore, which was, far more egregious. It was, an employee stealing information and selling it, $4,750,000. The issue there was they didn't conduct a risk analysis, they didn't do audits, they didn't have any way to track what happened, and got a significant penalty. The key takeaway is if you do the right thing and you have policies and procedures and you conduct a risk analysis and you notify the government when something has gone wrong, you can mitigate your risks, you can mitigate damages, but it's always something happens, notify the government, do your analysis, promptly notify the patient. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Jason, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So Netrix is a leader in security-based technologies. They reported that just in last year, a 400% increase in incidents where the losses exceeded over $200,000 each. And also just in the last 12 months, nearly half of the healthcare organizations experienced some kind of intrusion upon their network, with 12% of them reporting losses in excess over $500,000. 16% of breaches are being reported involving attackers that are utilizing artificial intelligence that could be phishing exercises or deep fakes. But most breached organizations reported don't have any governance or policies to manage artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, or oversight procedures, which isn't a surprise as to why 65% of breached organizations never fully recover. Now, some will say, but Matt, that's all well and good, that's fine, but I use the cloud. And my EHR company says I have nothing to worry about. Well, 10 years ago, breaches due to cloud misconfigurations weren't even a categorized threat, but today the cloud and the data within it are a prime target. So getting back to that question and things that Jason's discussed, and from a more of a technical perspective, are you liable if you get hacked using the cloud? And the answer is absolutely yes. You are fully responsible as an organization under HIPAA, as whether you're a covered entity or a business associates when you're dealing with EPHI. So for those of you that think that these principles don't apply because you're in the cloud, if you will, that's absolutely not the case. Everything applies to you once you move into the healthcare arena. So your business goes down, you have a breach, maybe there's a hack, are you going to wait it out? Well, think about your frustration when the internet goes down for just a few minutes. How about when you lose your cell coverage or you have a power outage? How do you handle calling patients in the office? How do you access records? What about rescheduling? What about even worse, or most importantly, how are you managing the care? Now think about in 2024 when United Healthcare had its cyber attack. How did it impact your business or most businesses? But to go even deeper, United Healthcare attack, although extremely impacting to maybe your practice or colleagues of yours, was not your breach. It was an inconvenience, there was losses, but think that that breach, if you were United Healthcare, affected 190 million individuals. UHC paid $22 million in a ransom fee alone, not including the millions of dollars in legal fees and IT costs. We've recently been working with an orthopedic practice in New Jersey who just had a cyber attack. They had to close their practice for 3 months, legal fees mounting, operational costs, in addition to just a 24-month recording for proper credit reporting for all the individuals that were compromised. An accounting firm in Massachusetts has not only been down for almost 6 months, but is now being sued by its clients to add insult and injury to these expenditures. So how do you quantify the reputational losses that you have worked so hard to gain in building who you are, your relationships, your reputation? Some just may never cover. The cost to downtime is far greater than just the one incident. It's an aggregate cost, looking at your total organization as a whole, and they can't be undermined. All right, Matt. Well, so I see the financial need. Jason talked about I should do these risk assessments, but what does all this cost? Well, that really depends. And that's impacted by a few factors that can include the size of your practice, the type of testing or the cybersecurity requirements, the status of your annual compliance adherence that you may or you may not have completed. But the most important thing that Jason talked about initially is making sure you have conducted a risk analysis. You can expect to pay thousands of dollars to at least protect your organization, but we've already reviewed, is that worth the cost of what could it really be? Now, we hear all too often, well, I'm not spending thousands, I don't make any money. There's no money in healthcare. My sister's son is an IT geek and he'll manage my network. That's going to be fine. Well, is this risk analysis a big deal? I mean, let's talk about those obligations that you have as a healthcare provider, or whether you're delivering healthcare services, or even just a business associate. If you are managing, touching, receiving anything related to EPHI in any way, shape, or form, you are governed underneath the security rule, as Jason pointed out, through the Office of Civil Rights, that is underneath Health and Human Services. Now, the security rule requires continually that organizations are assessing vulnerabilities, they're implementing measures, they're looking at their security, they're testing their network, they're looking at threats, what the hazards are, the security, and managing the integrity of the network. And that risk assessment is the very first step in that process of complying with the security rule. The security rule requires that risk analysis to be documented. And that documentation is not completing a form, putting a binder on the shelf. This is a continual requirement to be reviewing over and over again what you've done in your organization and how you're managing those documentations, policies, and procedures, if you will, against that for your risk analysis. Now, it's not just about paper. There are many technical safeguards and security requirements inside the security rule and that risk assessment. Some of these things Jason pointed out, but I want to just touch upon a few. This is not filling out a form and satisfying some boxes. There are many things that are talked about and addressed in the risk analysis, including the authentication processes and what you do, what audit controls you have, how will you manage them, what are your workstation securities. Here's one that gets overlooked all too often, and this is device management. And by device, we mean computers, laptops, tablets, scanners, firewalls, card readers, switches. When did you install these? What operating systems are they on? Have they been patched? One thing that is big right now is Windows 2010, now migrating to 11. Have you updated those? Are you tracking those? When did you migrate those? User management, event logging, contingency planning, all of these things are part of the risk analysis that you are required to have to do. Now, as Jason showed us, the low-hanging fruit in all of these settlements are risk analysis failure. It is a very simple question to ask. Did you do one? And if you didn't, you're going to get dinged. And if you still did, are you doing anything to manage yourself against that? All right, so I've got to do something. What's your action plan? Well, number one, as we beat to death, you got to complete this risk analysis. Is it fun? Well, it's about as fun as a colonoscopy, right? But there's a lot of prep, and unfortunately, there isn't the great rest that goes along with that. But that risk analysis is just one part. The smartest and the easiest thing for you to do is to partner with the right managed services provider, not an IT company, but making sure the firm that you're working with understands healthcare to implement the right types of procedures in place. They'll make sure that items are being monitored, the devices are up to date, proper authentication. We talked a little bit about training, as Jason did as well. 68% of all breaches involve some type of a human error. It's critical that you manage your organization, and the training of your people is critical. A good MSP can also enact phishing and social engineering testing to making sure your staff understand what to do and not to do. Equally so is backups. Do you have them? And if so, where are they? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? What does that look like? And always, always make sure that you've got some form of cyber insurance, which is a whole nother conversation and topic all too much itself. So why do I need this? And what do I need to do? Well, first off, you don't want to be a statistic. The risks are too high. The costs are too great. And from a local perspective, when I say local in New York here, I recall in 2022, there was a revenue cycle management firm that had about 925,000 patients' records that were compromised. The reputational damage alone from that was just unrecoverable, besides the fact that this organization was down for over 3 months. So take a look at your own practice, your own organization, and what would it cost you? What are the losses? Everything that you've worked for, just from your reputational standpoint, is truly unrecoverable. So, your solution is choose a managed service provider that is knowledgeable in healthcare, understands healthcare security to protect your practice and your business, that can help you from the risk analysis and guide you through areas that you may need some help, and working hand in hand with counsel or the right professionals to assist you. So to that effect, Joe, do we have any questions this afternoon?
Yeah, we have a couple. Here's one. I guess it would direct that towards either you or Jason. Have you ever been involved in a breach situation? What exactly happens, and what do we have to do?
I'll take that one. This is Jason. Yeah, I mean, hundreds of times a year this happens. Most of the time it's as routine as drafting a notice to the patient and listing the breach notification on the annual log that is submitted to the Office of Civil Rights. But as recently as March of this year, we had a large scale hack of a client, and in its it is all encompassing. You know, you have to notify your insurance carrier, you have to shut down your IT systems, you have to notify your banking relationships, you have to notify patients. I mean, it's a full-time job for somebody. So that's why you want to be diligent. Top of that, I mean, the impacts to revenue cycle are dramatic. The cost to the client, most clients do maintain some form of cyber insurance, but we see that the deductibles are really high. So you're coming out of pocket $25,000, $50,000 just to get your insurance carrier engaged. So there's a lot there.
There's another question. This one I really like. Understand that the amount of risk, but what are the chances it's going to actually happen to a small medical practice?
Well, hey, everyone, Jason, I can speak at least from a technical perspective. I mean, we receive calls all the time about concerns over network breach. But getting back to what the statistics are showing us is that over half of the healthcare industry has some kind of an event. Now, whether that event turns into a formalized breach, Jason, as of what you stated, we would leverage you and your experiences to that. But from a tech side, our phones are ringing all the time.
Here's one more. You showed the cost for doing analysis and other testing. It looked like it was pretty high. What does STI charge typically for those services?
Sure, Doug, good question. So yeah, the risk analysis, that whole slide as it relates to different aspects of testing, we review with the client from a perspective of cost, the elements of the SRA as provided by the security rule. Our initial assessments begin at $1,500, far less than what you'll see. And what we do in our case is we work with the practices so that we can help evaluate and complete the technical components of the security risk analysis by working with the practice or the office manager to have them focus their time and their energy where they need to on that SRA. But it's realistic to expect that an investment summary between $1,500 at the outset, typically $3,000 based upon the size of the practice. The best way to get closer to that is to have someone reach out to us and we can assist them appropriately.
I don't see any more questions right now. Let's give them a second or two. We're going to, this particular session's been recorded. It'll be posted on our website. If you want to have someone else within your organization take a look at it. Below is contact information for Matt, myself, and Jason. We'll leave it up for a minute or two so they can get a chance to copy that information down. And I would think that the recording will probably be available by tomorrow. If you go to sticomputer.com and go on to the webinar section, you can take a look at that. Let me take one last check for questions. Nope, that's it. So thank you everybody for attending. Went a little bit long, but we tried to keep it under 30 minutes for you. Thank you very much. And our next webinar will be probably sometime in November, and we'll make sure you get an invitation to that as well. So once again, thank you for attending.